Hello, it's Natalia again, and I'm here to speak up some more on a similar topic pertaining to my last video, which was about slave words used in the modern day that seem acceptable but really have an unhealthy effect on one's subconscious mind and behavior. Well, I'm definitely going to go a bit deeper into this, and I've been wanting to make this video for a while. It's about how also slave words and even the behaviors and the tendencies from slavery that have been perpetuated throughout the last 3 centuries, I feel have been affecting African American culture present day. And I'd like to speak up about it, get to the root of it, and see if this fresh perspective can have a positive effect on our culture. A lot of abusive, degrading behavior has been very subtle and subtly accepted. So I'd like to shine a light on it and speak up some more. When I say the subconscious mind doesn't sleep, like I said in my last video, meaning when you're surrounded, immersed in, or you say negative things and meanings to yourself, it becomes tendencies in a person's belief system. You know, that subconsciously cause things like low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, physical illness, unloving behavior, mental and emotional imbalances, unloving behavior towards oneself, abusive tendencies, unhealthy habits, and even addiction. So when you're in an environment that's unhealthy, or you're saying words to yourself that come from really degrading places, even if you are saying them in a more modern way, their creation came from a very hateful place. Or if you're hearing it from other people, you're hearing these negative terms and words and behaviors, you're watching negative media, you know, and these things create like a groove in the brain and a pattern, and it affects a person's behavior, and it affects the way a person looks at themselves, and it affects the way the person looks at life, and it affects the way a person interacts with other people and gets along with other people. It affects everything in a person, our subconscious minds, and what we surround ourselves in. You know, a plant grows in the sun, but it dies when there's no sun. If you put yourself in a healthy environment, you will thrive. When you're around healthy people who uplift you and say good things, you'll thrive. So let's get to the root of this some more. You know, the slave words that I was talking about that seem acceptable. So as far as like how the subconscious mind can affect a person's behavior, if a person is immersed in a certain type of behavior or a certain way of thinking, those tendencies start to run quietly in the back of a person's mind, you know, affecting their direct behavior. You know, and maybe these ways seem normal because this person's been surrounded by it for so long that it becomes a habit. You know, that's how abusive patterns are created, or unhealthy eating habits are created, or anything unhealthy. You surround yourself with it over repetitive mode over and over again, that's how it creates and affects your behavior. Slavery went on from the 1700s to the early 1900s, and that's a long time to endure abuse, you know? So during this time, new African Americans endured inhumane living and working conditions, inhumane, hard labor, being killed, women being impregnated by slave masters, being separated from their native land and families, having their babies taken away from them. You know, they also endured being degraded on a continuous basis, made fun of and ridiculed for their speech, for the foods they ate, their facial features, their skin tone, not skin color, skin tone, their speech, their body, their physical features and such, pretty much for who they were as a culture and individually and for existing. With that, a slew of abusive words were born, some that seem acceptable today, though are not acceptable ethically. Because when you hear these words, you know, that doesn't feel right in your core. I mean, they came from a hateful place, from a hateful mind, from an ignorant mind, you know? Perpetuating more ignorance. Don't. Throughout the 17, 18, and 1900s, there were all kinds of words that were used, and some that just turn into other words, and some that turn into other phrases, and it turns into slang, and it becomes acceptable. So, I remember in the Broadway play Hair, they had a song called Colored Spade. Africans were called, when they were brought to America and made into slaves, like the lyrics of this song are Colored Spade, Black Negro, Jungle Bunny, Jigaboo, Coon, Pickaninny, Uncle Tom, Aunt Jemima, Little Black Sambo, Cotton Pickin', Swamp Guinea, Junk Man, Shoeshine Boy, Elevator Operator, Table Cleaner, Zombie, Voodoo, Bangy Lip, Tap Dancer. You know, all hateful words. You know, those are some of the more harder core, deeply rooted words. But nevertheless, they were still said, and when you're exposed to that, it's very detrimental behavior and very inhumane. The stereotypical terms about eating watermelon, that's so unfair because almost everyone likes watermelon. Why are African Americans deemed as like these watermelon eaters? Almost everybody likes watermelon. Why does the stereotype have to just like be so painfully rooted, so unfairly rooted? There were terms like high yellow, mulatto, boy, and then there were things like blackface, first the word nappy, which can spawn off into a word like kinky that just still has a little to it. There's stereotypical words like, oh, neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods, blah, 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 bad neighborhoods, and terms about the ghetto, cornrowing hair, and cornbread, and, you know, hey, can you dance for me? And these are some of the phrases that just get perpetuated, all from times of slavery, and they're so unloving and they're so unfair. I mean, I know every culture has their highs and their lows, but I need to speak up about how demeaning this is and how acceptable it's been. And it's not acceptable. People think that this is funny, socially or in the media. These words came from an ignorant, hateful place, from slave masters that had no heart, no sense of respect for a culture of people who seem different than they are. They're just making fun of another culture just for the way that they look and act. Don't you think that that's the ignorant root right there? Like the people who started it instead of the people that they're pointing at? Okay. These words existed and were created and they spawned more new derogatory words for like 3 centuries. And that's a long time to use culturally degrading words. Long-term abuse can become deeply ingrained, so in time, over time, even as ignorant and as unkind as these words are, they've still been deemed acceptable, socially and culturally acceptable, and some words obviously more than others. I personally feel that this long-term distorted acceptance of this behavior and of these words has created a lingering, echoing, uncomfortable, uneasy background tape or movie running in the background of society as well as African American culture and in the media. And that these slave words and slave hierarchy behavior and are acceptable degrading ways. You know, even though consciously we may feel deeply and know in our core truth that it's not acceptable, it's not right. And you know how you know? Because when you hear it and you feel it, you just know that that's just like a punch. It's a verbal punch. Your consciousness knows. It tells you're human, so. I really feel like these slave words and slave hierarchy behaviors or tendencies have come intertwined into African American culture by default, and nailed in a little bit harder, and even actually a lot harder, by the media and by repetition. And when I say slave hierarchy behavior, I'm talking about like this dominating role and this submissive role, this, you know, delegating role and this role of like doing what the other one wants to do without having their own choice and being punished or ridiculed, or one is higher or one is lower, and I call that slave hierarchy behavior. And we know these words are not healthy or conducive for our culture or the behavior that comes from slavery. They've become deeply ingrained in African American culture and society because no one's really said stop the slave behavior, stop the slave words, which is a really big root cause. It's just become so intertwined in the way that we speak, and it's not healthy. You don't see too many other cultures really putting themselves down like some African Americans can put themselves down, and I think it's just a deeply ingrained, spawned off habit from slavery. I'm not putting our culture down, but I just want to call it out, so we'll stop. I'm not saying ignore your past, because we'll always remember slavery as part of our history, like Jewish people will always remember the Holocaust. What I'm expressing is stop the slavery patterns, now. And I know it takes time to change. Just be aware of it, please. Do some research on what happened during slavery, what the behaviors were, what the words were, and do your best to just stop putting yourselves down. Stop putting ourselves down. Stop going against ourselves as a culture and as people with all these names. Words that slave masters use, you know, our people heard them for like 3 centuries. So then we say it to ourselves and we say it to each other and it's become acceptable. I'm saying stop the slavery words. Stop the slavery hierarchy behavior, please. And I'm saying this compassionately, shining a light on it, just so we can be made aware, so we can make some changes for ourselves. Do you really, really think these words are doing anybody any good? They're doing good only in a sense of you get so fed up with hurting and suffering, you're going to find a new way. If our culture, as African Americans, have any deeply rooted issues of low self-worth, low self-esteem, making fun of ourselves like racist people do, accepting less, having self-hate, confusion of not knowing how to improve, lowering one's standards, accepting poverty as normal or healthy, or any unloving behavior towards oneself, ourself, or our culture. You know, see if any of these patterns or habits or beliefs or mind states or emotional states come from any social media or culturally acceptable patterns deemed, you know, from rooting from slavery, from the terms and the words and the behaviors that I just keep mentioning in this video, you know? The long-term effect that this can have on the culture. You know, if African Americans have been subconsciously exposed to see themselves as bad or low or in any way from long-term abuse, awareness of our true greatness must be emphasized instead of acceptable put-downs from anyone and oneself due to the acceptance of long-term abuse rooting from slavery. How do you think it's going to feel to an individual or to a culture when, you know, you're taken from your native land, you're forced into slavery, and you get your name changed? You're made fun of for existing. You're made fun of for your looks and your ways and your voice and your behavior. And enduring abuse, constant abuse, women pregnant by slave masters, and then having their babies taken away from them, degraded in almost every way, called degrading slave words, long-term, forced into inhumane living and work conditions, being killed, and even after the civil rights movement, living in tense times of segregation and continual degradation. Living and enduring like segregation with schools and bombings and riots and being hosed down, assassinations of leaders who are trying to make it better, and then like the death of Emmett Till. And even though there's a civil rights movement, it's far from civil. So how do you feel your culture would act or feel if they endured such long-term abuse and separation from their true nature, and in these conditions being enabled to live your own lives with these dominating, submissive types of treatment? It would affect your culture. It would affect your mind state. It would affect your behavior and your self-esteem and your self-worth and the ways that you treat yourself and your people and each other until someone says, you know, you're divine, and please weed out the subconscious tendencies rooted from slavery, from someone else's ignorant mind. All this came from somebody's hateful mind, someone who cannot accept a different culture, someone who talked or looked or acted or was just, skin tone was different, everything was different. All these slave words and tendencies and behaviors came from a hateful mind, an ignorant mind. People are trying to look at African Americans as bad or low or buy into the words pointed at their culture from these ignorant people, from slave masters from long ago. I say slave master lightly, it's not a master, but that's just the term that was used for them. Keep in mind that it's the slave masters who are the ones who are ignorant, not the Africans who got hurt and got affected by this behavior and did their best to stand up for themselves and find their dignity throughout all of this torture. And know that it takes a very small mind to act like that, and it takes a very great mind to love and accept. Keep in mind that these people who created these terms and these ways and these behaviors and these hierarchies and these ways in the media and in the culture and in society, keep in mind that those are hateful minds, small minds. And I do know that there are many African Americans within our culture and community that do have healthy, strong, self-love-based self-esteem. I'm just talking about the undercurrent feeling of an unhealthy self-worth from long-term exposure to slavery. And I know people have issues as individuals, but I'm just talking about how African American culture has been affected as a whole and how subconsciously it's just kind of like running a tape in the background, and we gotta just say stop. So I gotta say, you know, people who may not have grown up around many cultures, specifically African Americans or African-derived people, I've seen, you know, they may get their cultural information about African Americans from the media, from society, from TV, from the internet. And lots of it is laced with tinges of slavery-affected words and behaviors, and people who don't know the truth about African Americans firsthand from experience, or who have talked to someone in an authentic way and gotten to know them, they see these influences and they see these words. And they see them as acceptable because the media just jollies it up and makes it a big old, like, ghetto fabulous party. And it makes it all glamorous and stuff, but it's just, like, underlaced with just, like, ignorance and hate and put-downs. And, you know, these ways are seen acceptable, so they sometimes might approach African Americans with super not knowing ignorance. And we've got to speak up individually and collectively that this is not acceptable, you know, and reinstate the new paradigm of respect and self-love and self-worth and loving words and behaviors for our culture. So there, I've said it. Thank you.